So I wanted to quickly go over a few people that I think are important to read up on if you're trying to understand how to combat what's currently going on. And by combat, I don't mean with violence, I mean through ideology. So Patrick Buchanan is a political analyst for CNN with 265 videos in the C-SPAN library. The first appearance was in 1972, compiled program, blah, 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 blah. Appearances, political analyst, you can check this out on your own. His name's Patrick Buchanan. Here's some of the videos he's been on. He's also worked for Crossfire. He's pretty mainstream. He's a pretty mainstream conservative, but he's considered a right-wing extremist. He's not a right-wing extremist. He's a mainstream conservative, although a mainstream conservative from like the 60s. Ann Coulter is another conservative author I would highly recommend people read up on. Here are some videos from C-SPAN you can watch. Ann Coulter on impeachment and campaign. Ann Coulter, You can read some of this. I would recommend reading her book, Mugged. So we've gone over the biases of the mental health profession. Now let's look at the demography of the mental health profession. So this is Talk Therapists, okay? Therapist demographics and statistics in the United States. So therapist gender ratio by age, gender ratio, it's 24% male and 76% female. It's therapist racial demographics. You have, so let's see all gender info. Okay, so yeah, it's 75% male, 24% female. And we're going to take a look at the all the race demography. So as you can tell, whites do make up 72.6%, but you have to remember these are white women that have been having their heads filled with anti-male propaganda from birth until death. We're talking for generations here. And you have 7.9% Hispanic and Latino, 11.3% Asian, 3.8% unknown, and 0.4% Alaskan Native. So what you have to understand here, obviously, you're going to have an overabundance of white women. Now, I couldn't find demography on sexual orientation moving forward. So here you'll see that therapists seem to make the most money, up to $76,000 a year, in New Jersey and southeastern Pennsylvania, as well as Arizona and California. So the East and the West Coast, they seem to make the majority of the dough. Which cities have the most therapists? You can see this here. And this goes by where they make the most money. So this is additionally the percentage of female therapists has increased by 0.4% points since 2010. Now remember what that gentleman said, the former head of the Psychological Association, that if it were up to him, he would have recruited as many white straight men as possible because they are far underrepresented in mental health. So therapists don't disclose their political affiliation. And I agree with this to an extent. You want to be as politically as neutral as possible, or at least not say offensive things. When I worked at Pendel Mental Health, we had an intern from Liberia or Nigeria or wherever in Africa. And he was majoring in public health. Why he was doing an internship as a therapist, I have no idea. And he had stated to a group of women and men in our acute partial hospital, because I would do a number of acute partial hospital groups too, And he had asked, he said, who here supports abortion? And one young lady, who actually people wouldn't suspect, said, I don't support abortion. And the reason was that she was a conservative and not a liberal. And the gentleman had called her stupid in group. This is a gentleman that is majoring in public health and doing his internship at a mental health agency, referring to one of his clients as stupid. So psychology and mental health are predominantly liberal fields. Mental health treatment should welcome everyone regardless of politics. I guess some people didn't get that memo. Should therapists disclose their politics to clients? Many mental health professionals chose to disclose demographic characteristics such as race, gender, and sexual orientation. Should politics be included on this list? The mental health profession, and this is the thing, if you are a conservative and you work in the mental health profession, I will guarantee you, you will probably not be working in the mental health profession very long if you state that you are a conservative. Or say, in my case, say you're a third positionist. Say you're a national socialist. Okay? You're not going to be welcome in that arena. There are many political affiliations in the United States. Green Party, fascist, nationalist, national socialist. Okay? And that's the problem. Not everybody's welcome. And not everybody, and that's the thing. But in the same sense, it probably is wise. Now, I want to remind people, I'm not telling them what to do. But I'm just saying, in my own personal experience, I've found it to be very wise to avoid mental health treatment if you have political opinions that are center-right. Okay? So, this conservative psychologist perceived, perceived unwelcome. Many conservative opt out of treatment. Yes, this person says, I'm not a clinician, I'm trained as a researcher, yada, yada, yada. After the conservative psychologist wanted article was published, I was flooded with many stories. So somebody wanted a conservative therapist. You're not going to find a conservative therapist unless you go to, say, maybe a religious counselor. And even then, most of the people drawn to religious counseling are LGBTQ plus pro whatever. There's a lot of liberal Christians, so that's not even a sure thing. Moving forward. 538, psychologists looked in the mirror and saw a bunch of liberals. When New York University psychologist Jonathan Haidt asked about 1,000 attendees at the annual meeting of the Society for Personality and Social Psychology in 2011 to identify their political views with a show of hands, only 3 hands went up for conservative or on the right. Separately, a survey of more than 500 social and personality psychologists found that only 6% identified as conservative. I hope to God that these were private so that these people didn't get bullied out of their jobs. Okay. So, the survey also found that 37.5% of responders expressed a willingness to discriminate. Keep this in mind. People think I'm crazy because I'm saying I was discriminated against for my political views. 37.5% of mental health professionals that responded to this survey stated that they had willingness to discriminate against conservative colleagues when making hiring decisions. Psychologists, it appears, tend to fall on the liberal end of the political spectrum. Social psychology's left tilt has been widely discussed, yet it has been difficult to measure how political leanings influence work. I think we all know, but a new study has tried to quantify just that, and it found that social psychologists assess conservatives differently than they do liberals. It also found that scientists were aware of the potential for problems and willing to acknowledge them. The results confirm that a lack of political diversity within psychology may bias its findings on political issues. The study by the international team of researchers will be published in the forthcoming issue of the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology and had 2 parts. In part 1, the researchers presented 2,560 participants with 306 abstracts related to political beliefs or behavior drawn from 10 years worth of Society for Personality and Social Psychology meetings. Raters were asked to assess how the research characterized political conservatives and political liberals. They were also asked to the extent to which conservatives were the target of explanation. So they were asked to how they described politics, and then they were asked to what extent to ask the extent to which conservatives were the target of the explanation. Suppose, for instance, a study finds that conservatives are less likely to change their opinions on moral issues than liberals are when exposed to counter-arguments. The researchers could explain this as conservatives are cognitively rigid. Oh, no, you'll find quite the opposite. Inflexible and resistant to new arguments, said Eric Lewis Ullman, a psychologist at INSEAD in Singapore, and the study's corresponding author. However, they could just as easily have interpreted this as liberals are wishy-washy, overly flexible, and don't stand by their principles. Ullman and his colleagues asked participants to rate whether a study's findings were equally discussed in relation to liberals and conservatives, or instead were pinned on one group or the other. Sure enough, the abstract blah 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 explained findings in terms of conservative ideas rather than liberal ones. These differences are statistically small but practical, yada yada yada. Second part of the study tested to see whether psychologists were already aware of the field's bias. The researchers recruited 198 scientists. The scientists correctly predicted that the abstracts would be less favorable towards conservatives, but they estimated that this effect would be larger than it really was. While it's tempting to read into the results, psychologists think they're even more biased than they really are. This overestimation might be explained by the study's sample. This is very carefully conducted, blah, 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 blah. The fact that researchers are engaging in self-reflection, yes, but more clinicians need to engage in self-reflection on this issue could be a reason for optimism. So this is something that tries to make the case for reinstitutionalization and the hard truths about deinstitutionalization. The fact of the matter is, Ronald Reagan and Jerry Brown, 2 of the most consequential governors ever in California, led the state during 2 of the most well-intended but poorly executed movements in the state's history. The first was the deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill. The second resulted in fewer prison inmates and significant increases in homelessness and untreated mental illness. Now, what you need to understand is Ronald Reagan's deinstitutionalization was not meant to cause a rise in homelessness. People should still be able to get help if it's determined that they're a harm to themselves due to the fact that they cannot take care of themselves due to a persistent mental illness. It's just that the people in crisis don't like to do that. But mental health laws allow for that. Okay? Also, well, now, I'm not going to get into that in this one. But the fact of the matter is, deinstitutionalization was good for U.S. citizens' rights. It kept people from disappearing. So when we come back, I'm going to get to the meat and potatoes of this. This is about, you know what, I'll do it here. I'll do it now. So this is Mental Health Roundups, the next phase of the government's war on thought crimes. This is how it begins. In communities across the nation, police are being empowered to forcibly detain individuals they believe are mentally ill. Remember what Trump said. Take the guns first and then have your due process. Take the guns first and then have your due process. Okay? Just remember that. Based solely on their own judgment, even if those individuals pose no danger to others. In New York City, for example, you could find yourself forcibly hospitalized for suspected mental illness if you carry firmly held beliefs not congruent with cultural ideas. And I'm going to get into what some of those beliefs are. Exhibit a willingness to engage in meaningful discussion. So if you have a willingness to engage in meaningful discussion, have excessive fears of specific stimuli, or refuse voluntary treatment recommendations. If you refuse voluntary treatment recommendations, you may be detained in New York City. While these programs are ostensibly aimed at getting the homeless off the streets, when combined with advances in mass surveillance technologies, artificial intelligence-powered programs that can track people by their biometrics and behavior, mental health sensor data, the trackable blah blah blah, this is a real threat to the public, okay? Make no mistake, these are building blocks for the American Gulag. Totalitarian regimes such as the Soviet Union also declared dissidents mentally ill. I've gone over this before. Okay, look, I just came across this article today. Okay, so let's take a look here. So a young man hangs out on a street corner in Midtown Manhattan. Okay. So, blah, 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 blah. The scenario from, so he shadow boxes and talks to himself, and beneath him are poster boards with scrolled conspiracy theories. The restaurant's manager worries the man could be scaring off customers and calls 911. Okay. Should the responding police officer remove the man to a hospital, forcing him if he refuses? No. The cop should tell him move along unless he's a threat to somebody. This is a scenario, or if he is, now this is where as a person that has been a former security guard and went to school for criminal justice, there is a place, at least in Pennsylvania law, where if somebody is a harm to themselves, if they're wearing 72 jackets in the middle of summer, you can have them checked out by a crisis worker, but the crisis worker very rarely will hospitalize them, unfortunately, and they are a harm to themselves. Okay? But this person in this scenario is not a harm to themselves. But this is the scenario being put forth, that you can just scoop people up off the streets. This is why Reagan did deinstitutionalization, so you could stop making Americans disappear if you didn't like them or you didn't like what they had to say. Now remember, the fact of the matter is, the big reason they want to put you in a hospital so they can control your behavior with force. Okay? This is for the people that are resistant to the brainwashing. So what are they going to do? They're going to drug you. Okay? So keep in mind, I had brought up how both previous places, the place I went for help, and my previous employer do not fill people's prescriptions on times. Well, you get withdrawal side effects, okay? So psychiatric medications carry the risk for neurotoxic adverse effects. The occurrence of neurotoxic effects can potentially reduce drug compliance. No shit, because it's poison. Some rebound or withdrawal effects, such as the possibility of sudden or severe emergence or reemergence of psychosis in antipsychotic withdrawal, may appear. You can also have heart palpitations, heart failure, all sorts of stuff from withdrawal from some of the other drugs like benzos and stuff. You all have seen this enough. You can go through this to see how many of these neurotoxins are psychiatric medications that have absolutely no purpose in treating anything. So why are psychiatric drugs killing your brain? You can't talk to modern psychiatry. You can't talk of modern psychiatry without talking about psychiatric medication, which has become the cornerstone of the practice over decades. The problem with psychiatric drugs, however, is that they do more harm than good to the brain, and withdrawal can be a real challenge if you've already started taking them. Many psychiatrists wouldn't let you know that, though, as you will learn from Dr. Timothy J. Hayes, yada yada yada. So, why psychiatric drugs are killing your brain? Harvard-trained psychiatrist and former consultant at National Institute of Mental Health, blah, blah, blah. He has many decades of successful... This is Dr. Peter Breggin. He got into this whole area when he was 18 years old at Harvard, his freshman year. A friend of his said he and his brother had started to volunteer at the state mental hospital. So he'd always been interested in psychology. He never imagined being a physician at Harvard. He ended up going to the state hospital. It reminded him when he walked into it, as his uncle describes, Nazi concentration camps. He'd been liberating in World War II. He saw electroshock treatment. He ended up running the program. He became very involved in it. He says, we want to do a group of students, That convinced him right away that what people needed was human services. Not mental health services, human services. Even though he didn't know a lot about love in his own life, he knew that love was somehow real. Blah, 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 blah. You can read this on your own. It's important to read it, but I don't feel like going there. This is about commonly abused prescription and over-the-counter drugs. Take a look at it at your leisure. When we come back, I'm going to go over the Department of Justice's fast facts about prescription drugs and prescription drug abuse. I'm going to talk about a Philadelphia suburban doctor that got caught running a pill mill. And I'm going to introduce you to the Psychiatric Crime Database.